The clerk slid a stamped page across the counter, and the sound felt louder than the entire courthouse. The single word at the center, dissolved. You believe love ends with a fight, with a scream. But our love didn't end. It just dissolved. It broke down in silence. I mistook her exhaustion for distance. She mistook my fear for strength. The law said, "You are separate." So I asked her for one last coffee, for one last chance to tell the truth that broke us. Because the truest distance is often the distance we refuse to name. We are either building or we are eroding. Today, we chose to try to build a place to sit with the truth without flinching. But how do you start a second love story when the first one never finished? Find out in the second love tale. The clerk slid a stamped page across the counter, and the sound felt louder than the entire courthouse. It was a single authoritative shush against a year of whispers, a procedural command silencing a history. The paper was heavy, legal cardstock, a medium built to carry extreme weight. And yet it seemed to float there, a small raft carrying the single decisive word. The seal, officially pressed and inked, glinted dull on the page, the gold catching the fluorescent light like a small, indifferent, and incredibly patient moon. I read the document, my eyes tracing the familiar, devastating architecture of our names, Lena Marie and Michael Andrew, then the case number, a cold string of digits that documented our undoing, the date, today, and finally, the word that sat in the middle like a hinge that had snapped, dissolved. My pen, when I reached for it, felt alien in my hand. It was my favorite pen, weighted for architectural drawing, now pressed into the service of finality. It shook once, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor, as I signed for the certified copy. I had spent 2 decades engineering beams of glass, steel, and concrete, structures meant to outlive their designers by a century. I had calculated load-bearing capacity against the complex physics of wind and gravity, but I could not, for the life of me, engineer the sheer crushing weight that a single, simple word carried when it was about us. It felt like a fundamental error in my life's calculations. Lena was 2 paces to my left, just close enough that I could hear the faint, clean sound of her breathing. It was a shallow, steady rhythm, the precise, economical breath of a person who had trained their body to conserve every ounce of energy for a moment of crisis. Her hair was tied back in a low, tight knot at the nape of her neck, the way she did for night shifts in the emergency room, an unconscious preparation for high stakes. The blue of her coat, a soft, expensive wool, was the exact shade of the early evening sky over Elliott Bay when the light forgets itself and simply gives up on the day. She looked at the document, absorbing the finality of it with that surgical stillness of hers. Then her eyes lifted, finding mine. Her mouth formed a careful, precise line that had become our shared treaty over the last bitter year. No blame in public, no scenes, dignity first. It was a promise of mutual protection, a final, necessary courtesy. I could see the memory of a dozen unspoken arguments flash in the deep-set concentration of her eyes, but she held them back, a clinician prioritizing the stability of the scene over her own pain. I recognized the armor. It was heartbreaking to watch her use it on the last morning of our legal life. The clerk, whose face was a study in practiced neutrality, thanked us with the neutral cadence of a person who had seen every version of ending. We gave our brief, clipped replies and turned, stepping into the main corridor. The courthouse air was thick and smelled of old paper, damp wool from the coats of strangers, and a faint, stale perfume of desperation and bureaucracy. For a second, the corridor dissolved. I was standing in the memory of our kitchen in the early years, the Capitol Hill apartment with the 20 windows. I could feel the cold tile on my feet, the curling aromatic coffee steam rising over a chipped mug that read, "Architects do it with a T-square." I could see Lena in socks, leaning against the counter, her hair down, laughing because I had burned the pancakes again. There was a time when our mornings carried gravity and light in equal, astonishing measure, when the simple act of being in the same room was a physics all its own. I cleared my throat. The noise was too loud, too much of a physical intrusion into the quiet that encased us. I needed a bridge, a ritual, an anchor to pull us out of the legal vacuum. "There is a place around the corner," I said. The words tasted like paper and old regret. "The one with the brick walls?" "One last coffee?" She blinked once, slowly, processing the audacity of the suggestion. Her eyes softened, a dangerous, brief dip of the armor, but they did not turn away. She fixed on a spot past my shoulder. "Today of all days?" she asked. The question was not a challenge, but a quiet, honest reckoning. It carried the weight of everything we were running from. "Today of all days?" I said. The words sounded like a dare thrown across a great, cold distance to my own chest. It was an offering of shared vulnerability, a request to not let the legal end be the human end. I lifted the large black umbrella, the one that had waited like an unasked, necessary question in the corner, and offered it to share. It was a gesture of simple shelter, nothing more. Outside, Seattle was exactly as it is supposed to be when a city wants you tender and knows the exact measure of your loneliness. Rain stitched the air into a fine, wet screen, blurring the edges of the world. The crosswalk light counted down in orange a steady, inevitable march to zero, and somewhere far above us a gull called out a clean, high, lonely sound, as if conducting the traffic below. We walked down 3rd Avenue toward Pioneer Square under a ledge of stone where moss grew in stubborn, defiant seams. The world felt muted, rendered in shades of gray and oxidized copper. I kept the umbrella tilted toward her shoulder, protecting her from the worst of the runoff. She pretended not to notice the deliberate, careful angle. It was a dance we had mastered, the performance of caring without acknowledgement. The coffee shop was a narrow, deep room with brick walls that had absorbed a century of conversation and the intense aroma of roasted beans. A long counter ran the length of the room, looking like it had been rescued from a boat, its wood scarred and beautiful. A barista, a young man whose movements were as efficient as a well-oiled machine, nodded us toward the back. A small, round, marble-topped table sat under a framed antique map of a city that was definitely not Seattle, a map of a past, perhaps, or a destination never reached. A steam wand hissed, a sound like a small, sharp exhalation. A bell chimed for an order. I held the door as Lena stepped in, the movement utterly familiar, utterly natural. The street behind her, framed in the dark wood of the doorframe, turned to a smear of watercolor, a beautiful, indistinct blur that felt like the exact state of our shared history. We stood at the counter and ordered what we had always ordered, the ritual a painful comfort. For her, a black coffee, a straight-up Americano, that she insisted tasted honest, without any dairy or syrup to dilute the truth. For me, a cappuccino, the precise layered foam giving the illusion of a kinder, softer morning than the one we had actually earned. The cups arrived with small, perfect white waves along their rims. We carried them back to the small table. I felt a desperate, panicked urge to say everything and nothing all at once, to confess, to apologize, to rewind. I swallowed the words, afraid of spilling them onto the fragile surface of the moment. Lena did not look at her coffee. Instead, she traced the condensation ring a forgotten glass had left behind on the marble table. The small, meticulous motion was achingly familiar, like the way she would flip a pen twice before filling out forms or the way she folded the corners of her scrub pants. We had built an entire, sprawling life on these small, familiar things, and then we had watched, helpless, as it all fell through the gaps between them. The spaces we had ignored became canyons. "I thought you hated this day," she said, her voice low, a confidential murmur against the soft thrum of the coffee shop. "The finality. The bureaucracy." "I do," I answered, wrapping my hands around the comforting, solid heat of my cup. "I hate the paperwork, the simple logic of it. That is precisely why I wanted to meet it here, with something we did right once, with a ritual we both understood." She looked at me then. Not through me, not past me, but at me. Her eyes held that intense professional calm that she wore like armor into the trauma bay. "We did many things right, Michael," she said, Her voice was steady, holding a clear, flat frequency of fact. I knew that tone. It was the one she used to steady the trembling families at 3 a.m. when the machine suddenly spoke a new, terrifying language of failure. We did, I conceded, acknowledging the truth in her defense. And we did a few very quiet, irrevocable things wrong. The perfect, smooth foam on my cappuccino broke under the tentative touch of my spoon, cracking like a small, brittle snowfield. I watched the foam dissolve, a little lesson in front of me about how easily something beautiful can vanish. We let the silence sit. It was not the comfortable, companioned quiet of our early years, the silence of two people reading side by side. I used to believe silence meant agreement, a safe harbor. After the year we had, I knew better. Silence is a room with both of you inside, standing against opposite walls, each waiting for the other to drop their shield first. It is the space between you, echoing with unspoken words that became stones. She lifted her honest black coffee. The gesture was a deliberate closure of the topic. To signatures and endings, she said, half a toast, half a shield, a polite goodbye to the chapter. I tapped my cup gently against hers. The fragile ceramic clinked. To telling the truth, I said, offering a new, more dangerous proposition. Her smile tilted, a small, weary movement. Careful, Michael. Truth is rarely a coffee shop portion. It requires a larger mug and possibly a therapist. Then we can refill, I said. The possibility of refilling, of continuing, hung in the air. She almost laughed, a genuine, unarmored sound, and the sound vibrated in my bones like the opening note of a song I had missed for months. I felt a small, crucial board in my chest shift, releasing a fraction of the tension. She turned her gaze to the window. The rain continued its steady, quiet work, making a thin, watery film on the glass. Do you remember the first time we were here? She asked, the question a soft, unexpected return to shared ground. The night after your first code blue, I said, the memory immediate, visceral. You walked for 20 blocks because you did not want to sit with the adrenaline alone. Your hands shook until I put mine over them, here, on this table. They felt like birds trying to fly away. You said, she recalled, her voice softening with the precise memory, your hands save strangers. Let me hold them when they cannot save you. The echo of my own words between us felt like a bridge that had not collapsed after all, just one that had been closed to traffic for a long time. I nodded. I meant it then. I mean it now, even today. I had promised myself I would not make any more promises. Sometimes, I realized, the truest vow is only a remembering, an honest restatement of a past truth in a brutal present. She sipped her coffee, a long, deliberate pull that seemed to stabilize her. People do not fall out of love on a schedule, she said, her voice turning to a quiet, clinical observation. They fatigue. They ration. Their days take them away, ounce by ounce. It is an erosion. I mistook your exhaustion for distance, I said, stating my half of the ledger. I mistook my silence for restraint. I kept thinking time itself would make us kinder or somehow fix the break. It only made us quieter. She placed her cup on the saucer with the precision of a nurse setting down a vial that must not be spilled. The ceramic made a gentle final click. You married a person who kept her promises to everyone else, the patients, the staff, the hospital, before she kept them to you, she confessed, her voice without self-pity, just accurate. I married a person who could design an entire city skyline, but could not say, I am afraid out loud in his own home. That is fair, I said. The weight of her accusation was heavy, but clean. I welcomed the honesty of it. I was afraid of failing you, of failing the dream of us. And mostly, I was afraid of naming the fracture and thereby making it irrevocably real. A stark memory lifted in the warmth of the coffee shop, sharp and clear like a photograph under a heat lamp. The winter morning, my firm landed the waterfront project, the career-defining one. I had gone to the office before dawn to revel in the silent, empty building, leaving a hasty note on the kitchen counter. Big news. Back soon. When I came back, elated, Lena sat in the hallway with a small duffel bag packed, not as a threat, but simply as a measurement. We were living in a calculus of absences, and the total sum had finally, startlingly, presented itself to us both. I brought something, I said, speaking more to the table's smooth marble than to her. The item felt small and inadequate against the enormity of the morning. I slid a small, flat box across the wood. Inside, resting on a bed of cotton, was a single old-fashioned brass spare key on a ring with a faded blue tag. It was the key to our old Capitol Hill apartment, the one with the soft floorboards and the neighbor who sang scales at noon. "You kept that," she said, her voice barely above the quiet rhythm of the rain outside. It was not an accusation, but a simple recognition of a lingering anchor. "I should have returned it months ago," I said, admitting the small act of emotional hoarding. I told myself it did not matter, that it was just a piece of metal. The truth is that it did. I could not make myself put it in the mail. It felt like shipping away a room where we had not finished speaking. She looked at the key without touching it. It rested there, an artifact of a life. The framed map above our heads listed a river I had never crossed. I thought of all the borders I had drawn with pencils and rulers in my work, and how the body makes its own complicated maps of longing and belonging. "Do you want me to take it now?" she asked. The question was a procedural query, an attempt to assign the relic to its final resting place. "I want you to do whatever makes you feel lighter," I said, a rare surrender of control. "If that means leaving it here, then we will let the tide of the busboy's cloth take it when he wipes down the table. If that means taking it, I will trust your reason and your choice." She tilted her head, a slight, perceptible movement of notice. "You always loved to solve, to offer the final, elegant, structural fix. Today, you are offering a choice, an open-ended path." "I notice the difference, Michael." "I am trying to notice the differences that matter," I said, feeling the weight of the morning's lessons settling on my shoulders. "This is the first day that the law says we are not us." I wanted to meet that day with respect, with gratitude for what we had, with coffee that tastes honest. Her eyes brightened with a moisture that did not belong to the weather outside, but the moisture did not fall. It was held back, disciplined. "You asked for one last coffee," she said, the gentle challenge returning. "What comes after coffee, Michael?" "Talking," I said. "Listening. Maybe walking under that square of trees in Pioneer Square. Maybe nothing. Maybe sitting in the car while the rain becomes a drum on the roof. I did not ask to undo anything, Lena. I asked to be with you while the word on that page becomes real." She folded her hands on the table. The hospital had taught her to make a cathedral out of a pause, a small space of silence where a decision is formed. "One day," she said, quoting me from months ago, "we are either building or we are eroding. Today, I do not know which one we are doing." "Today," I said, lifting my chin, "I would like to build a chair. Just one, a place to sit with the truth without flinching." Her mouth softened completely. The barista called out an order. She almost smiled, and the tension in the room eased palpably. "One last coffee," she repeated, testing the shape of the phrase in her mouth. "I can do that." We did not rush. The rain wrote the same sentence on the window over and over again. I realized, in that quiet, brick-lined room, that forgiveness sometimes begins not with grand gestures, but with the intensely ordinary, with the curl of steam on a glass, with 2 chairs, with the simple, difficult choice to stay a little longer when leaving would be infinitely easier. "Here is what I know," I said, feeling my pulse settle into something steady and reliable, a good foundation. "Closure is a door you open together, or it stays forever ajar, forever leaking cold air into the rest of your life." "And here is what I know," she replied, her voice low and clear, a clean frequency. I am not afraid of being honest with you anymore. I am only afraid of being honest too late. She reached into the box and lifted the key. It was small enough to vanish in her palm. She put it into the deep pocket of her coat without ceremony. The gesture was neither a return nor a refusal. It was only a pause with edges. She had made a choice not to drift. "We have time for a second cup," she said. "If what you want after coffee is more talking." I nodded. "I want to hear what you carried alone, Lena, so I can stop imagining monsters that were only shadows." "Then start with yours," she said, the quiet command of a clinician. "Monsters are less frightening when we give them names." The rain softened outside, easing into a gentle, continuous sigh. I took a breath that felt like stepping onto a new foundation, not yet finished, but level beneath my feet. The second cups arrived with a faint halo of steam. I wrapped my hands around the warmth and tried to imagine the size of a truth that could fit inside a coffee cup. I named my first monster Control. I like drawings and schedules because they keep panic on a leash. When your hours became unpredictable, my grip tightened. I believed steadiness was love. You needed softness. I gave you plans. The second monster was inheritance. My father was a quiet man, sternly kind. He taught me to show up and carry weight. He did not teach me how to say, "I am afraid you will not need me." When you started to carry your own storms, I told myself to stand back and be strong. What I did was disappear. Lena listened with that alert stillness. She let the line settle. "You were present like a building is present. Solid. Impressive. Hard to enter without a key." The metaphor cut deep because it was perfectly accurate. Then it was her turn. Her first monster was adrenaline. The ER rewards a focus that makes everything else feel slow. I could go from flatlining to laughter in 5 minutes at work. At home, I could not find the gear between those speeds. Your quiet felt like a wall when I needed a landing. Her second was guilt. I saw the worst of life. I told myself that I had to come home grateful, buoyant, generous. When I was human instead, I punished myself by doing more shifts. It was a way to outrun the mirror. I spoke of the final monster, success. I thought bringing home the big project, the beautiful building, would save us. Instead, I won a building and lost a language. She recalled what I said when we signed the Capitol Hill lease. "Promise me we will learn to live with that much light." She concluded. We forgot how. We pulled the curtain so slowly that it looked like weather. I slid the folded, unsent letter from my pocket. I read 2 lines. I did not fall out of love. I drifted out of reach. I kept believing that silence would make me noble when honesty would have made me near. She told me she saw a counselor who asked, "Where do you practice triage at home?" She realized she came home empty because all her sorting and saving was done at work. I responded, "Love is not a verdict. It is a daily practice of attention." She breathed, letting a defense soften. That sentence could be a staircase. You could build an entire house on that. We walked toward Occidental Square. I asked her if she wanted to see the apartment. She said, "Not today. I would rather do it when we can sit on the floor and let the ghosts see that we are not afraid." We drove down the hill toward the waterfront garage, slid into the car, and the rain found the roof with a rhythm that felt intended. I confessed what I wanted as a child, permission to worry out loud. Now I wanted practice, the chance to say what is true before it calcifies into absence. She leaned her head back. She told me she used to want to be the person who ran toward trouble. Now she wanted to be the person who knows when to stay. She wanted to be brave enough to stay. I asked to see her again tomorrow, offering to pick her up after her shift with honest coffee, to watch the city practice being beautiful. She accepted. Pick me up at 4:15. If I am late, it is because someone needed a voice to say, "You are not alone." She turned her palm upward on the console. It was a demonstration that empty space can be generous. I placed my hand near hers. The closeness became its own temperature. She offered one more truth. I kept the spare key because I did not know if I wanted to be the person who leaves doors open. Today I put it in my pocket because I want to choose, not drift. I nodded. Choice is the only bridge that holds in this weather. The next day I was on First Hill by 3:45. At 4:28, Lena came out. She was late, but I told her, "You are exactly on time for whatever this is." I held out the cup. Honest coffee. We drove to the overlook at Queen Anne. She described her day with clinical detachment, a good outcome that began in fear. A nurse who needed a second pair of hands. "I am very tired. I would like to borrow your quiet for a few minutes." I realized ritual is just attention with a calendar. She defined our next phase. Attention is how love keeps time. If we do not count each other, the day does not either. I outlined my new practice. When her shift runs past, I will not make a story about neglect. I will say, "Tell me one thing about your day," and then I will listen. She countered, "I will say, 'Tell me where your mind stood still today,' and I will let your stillness be an answer and not a crime." She offered the tangible next step. "I have a box in my closet. I would like to bring it to the old apartment on Saturday morning. I would like to set things on the floor and choose, not drift, choose." I instantly agreed. Saturday, 9 a.m. We can open windows and let the place breathe. She moved her hand to the bench, palm up, and I placed my hand in hers. The contact hummed. I promised, when the control arrives like a manual in my mouth, I will say, "I am scared," before I start giving instructions to a life that is not a project. She promised, when the adrenaline comes home with me, I need to know that I can say, "I am too fast inside, and you will not slow me by ignoring me. You will slow me by seeing me." Saturday arrived with a clear, silvery light. We climbed the stairs to the old apartment. The door yielded like a memory you do not insist on. Cold air folded into the room. We played gentle piano music. She opened the box. She said simply, "We will choose." I asked to start with the notes. She read the first. "Remember to learn to live with this much light." We kept it. Halfway through, my work phone quivered. A supply delay, the architect's emergency. I named my fear. I am afraid that if I do not solve this now, it will become a fire that proves I am irresponsible. Lena watched me. She said, "You can tell them you will call back at 12:15. Offer a time. Offer presence. You are allowed to choose your order of care." I typed the response slowly. I set a boundary. I realized I changed the choreography. We divided the objects into 3 circles. Keep, donate, release. She grew quiet, closing her eyes. I am too fast inside. I am tracing the shape of leaving without intending to leave. Can we ground for a minute? I placed my palm on the floor and grounded us in the wood's cool texture. I said, "Stay." She opened her eyes. That is what I meant when I said I want to be brave enough to stay. I called the project manager at 11:58. I spoke clearly and delegated the task. I returned, feeling the shape of leadership, not rescue. I placed a companion note under the radiator. I realized closure is not an exit. It is an honest doorway. We ate pastries and drank the last of the coffees. We walked toward Volunteer Park. I told her, "Love is what you decide to carry even after your hands are tired." She replied, "And joy is a muscle. We can train it with ordinary weight." We bought vegetables and a loaf of bread. Back at my apartment, I set the Riverstone bowl on the table like a small altar. We chopped onions, she rinsed lentils. Steam rose, she teased. "You are giving orders to vegetables." It is safe for me to like this. I told her, boundaries are the frame that let the painting breathe. As we ate, she told me my father had called her, proud of her for the way she cared for me, even when care looked like leaving. I promised we would make room for him again when it felt like honoring and not strategy. The lights flickered and went out. The outage felt like a gift. We lit 2 candles. I realized Home is the place where truth does not cost you your place at the table, she answered. Then we are home. My work phone vibrated. I turned it over. I chose to honor this light. She offered an alibi. The outage gave you an alibi. Use it. Call back after we have finished eating. When the lights returned, she received a message from the hospital, a plea for a night shift. She typed a careful refusal. I called it brave, she corrected. It was sensible. I am learning the difference between heroic and healthy. Healthy is harder. I read the next lines of my unsent letter. I kept making blueprints for towers when our foundation asked for a garden. I confused height with meaning. I confused effort with care. She closed her eyes. You are forgiving yourself in that sentence. That is the path I can walk beside. We moved to the couch. I drew a rectangle divided into 6 smaller panes. I offered my architect's peace offering, a practice for 6 Sundays. We would sit for 1 hour. The only question, what did your attention love this week? She loved it. It promises presence, not magic. We called it window practice, a way to learn to live with that much light again. I spoke the memory that still hurts. The morning she texted, "I need space," from the hallway. It taught me that words arrive that cannot be reheard, only answered. She shared hers. The night I took a photo of her asleep with her badge on. It taught her that her body had become a billboard for exhaustion. Before she left, we stood on the threshold. She said, "Tomorrow is Sunday 1. Choose the first window." We lifted our hands and closed the small gap, letting our hands hold not as a claim but as a sentence without a period yet. After she left, I washed the 2 bowls again. I wrote on the first pane of the sketchbook, "Attention is love doing the dishes." Sunday arrived. At 4, we met at the benches by the ferry terminal windows. I established the frame. For 1 hour, no fixing, no forecasting. She agreed. Only noticing. She asked, "What did your attention love this week?" I told her. Her laugh when the lights went out. The sound of bread agreeing to be torn. The moment she said, "Stay," and meant it. She told me her attention loved. My patience with the work call. The shape of my listening. The Riverstone bowl catching steam. I said, "Forgiveness is not a feeling. It is an itinerary. You choose the next right place, and you go there together." She replied, "Attention is the only vow that outlives a ceremony." I brought out the old key and placed it in my palm. Beside it, I set a new blank key, brass, uncut, faceless as a future. I told her I brought the blank one to ask a question of practice, not haste. Will you choose to date me with the seriousness of a marriage and the flexibility of a season? 6 Sundays is our first frame. If, at the end, our attention still wants the same address, I will ask you to marry me again. She lifted the old key, slid it back to my side. Keep this as a proof that we can carry history without dragging it. Then she picked up the blank key. I choose the practice. I choose the 6 Sundays. I choose to date you as if attention is our common language. We walked to the open deck of the ferry. The wind pressed its hand to our chests. She said, "I do not want to perform healing. I want to live it, even when it looks like boredom or kindness." I took a breath that tasted of salt and iron. "I love you," I told her. "I loved you when we were a legal sentence. I love you now with the knowledge that love is not an emergency. It is a craft. I will practice it hour by hour." She answered, "I love you. I loved you at the hospital door. I love you now with the knowledge that love is not a test. It is a room that we keep sweeping." We rested our foreheads together for the length of one faithful breath. On the way back, I wrote in the first pane, Sunday 1, the ferry window. We noticed without cure. We chose without hurry. As the ferry eased into the terminal, I spoke the only words that felt right and true, shaped for everyone who had ever stood between an ending and a beginning. Thank you for watching Second Love Tale. If you believe in second chances, like, comment, and share. See you in the next tale, where love finds its way again.